Good afternoon and welcome to another seminar for graduate structural engineers. This time we're going to talk about construction monitoring and PS4s. And while I say it's for graduate engineers, those unfamiliar with New Zealand practice will also need to be familiar with producer statements. So we'll look at some of the roles and responsibilities of engineers when working on a construction monitoring phase of the project. And we'll go through a typical site inspection report and how you put together the documents for the producer statement PS4. So construction monitoring levels. The very basic is CM1. And on CM1, we wouldn't expect to do a great deal of construction monitoring. In fact, we wouldn't expect to monitor it at all. We'd leave it to the council and we wouldn't produce a producer statement PS4 for a job like that. So this is minor works as well. Now, the statement there that says you visit the works at a frequency agreed with the client to review important materials of construction, critical work, procedures, and so on, and be available to advise the construction. This applies at all levels. Now, what changes is the frequency of your visits. So CM1 probably won't visit at all, or maybe only an informal visit. CM2 is for smaller projects, and you're likely to visit as and when required, maybe once every couple of weeks. And this is where it's acceptable to have a higher than normal risk of non-compliance. So Redco would only monitor the principal structural element as the work proceeds, as identified in the inspection schedule. CM3, medium-sized jobs, and it's a normal risk of non-compliance. And we would go again, do a construction monitoring visit as and when required. So those are the major elements of the work, everything identified in the inspection schedule. CM4 is for larger jobs, and we probably go twice a week, and as often as required. CM5 is the big stuff. This is a large, significant project. It's going to be complicated, where compliance is critical in there. And we would be going at least, well, probably every day. And you're getting towards the role of what used to be called the resident engineer, the design representative on site. So it's an interesting point to note that you are there to monitor the progress of the construction and how well it is complying or not with the specification and the drawings and the design. You are not the resident engineer and you are not the clerk of works. Those roles sadly have disappeared. Here's a typical inspection schedule. Here's one I prepared earlier. And again, it reminds you that you need to see all the consented documents. So the consented documents will usually be a set of drawings that will be stamped by the local council as approved for building consent. Engineering fill, well, we usually leave that to the geotechnical engineer, particularly the compaction side of things. For smaller jobs, we can do a ground verification check because we'll often assume that we're working with good ground. How will we prove that? Well, we can do our minor tests, ground penetration tests or a shear vein test as well. So for all major bits of work, we'll be looking at to inspect the footings and beams, slabs, and so on, and walls pre-pour. So let's have a look at the reinforcement before you pour concrete on it. Has it got all the bars you want, and have you got adequate cover? Is the cast actually clean? Finally, one is SED deck fixing, so we leave that to the council. So what about this producer statement, the PS4? Well, it's intended to be used by a suitably qualified and competent design professional. And it's a statement of opinion. It's based on reasonable grounds, and those grounds you need to state within your records. And what we do is we record the construction monitoring activity. You may also record certain aspects of the building work and any information supplied by the contractor or the subcontractors. PS4 should record what level of construction monitoring you are doing, so whether it's CM2 or 3 or 4. And any assumptions made. during those visits. So here's our Redco PS4 template, and again, it's an Excel sheet. Pop in the job number and the rest of it populates. If you click on Create, it produces a PDF of the producer statement. And this is based on the standard PS4 template from Engineering New Zealand. So the basic information will already be populated, but it's an editable text field, so you can change it as and when required. More importantly, the council will want what's it in respect to, who's done it, building consent number, and so forth, and who signed it off. This one is not signed at the moment, and don't forget the date. Now, there is guidance on producer statements from Engineering New Zealand, and at the very bottom, you'll notice there's an online form. And here it is. If you go to the Engineering New Zealand website, it will take you to this form. And what kind of form are you doing? 1, 2, or 4? What's your amount of liability? It's interesting, it only puts up to $500,000. An awful lot of companies are demanding much higher, even 5 or 10 million liability as well. If you press next, you can fill in your details. And then I put in random text to populate things like the owner, street address, suburb, and so on. Put your engineering number in there, click next, and off it goes. So what are you complying with? Now, usually we'll be complying with B1 and put in our job number, the building, street address, and so forth. Was there any amendments? If so, you need to include them. Anything marked as SED? Well, if we're involved, there probably will be some SED work, specific engineering design. So which part of the building or buildings were you looking at? For example, in this case, it was just the roof. What level of monitoring? And if you click on next, that will crunch through. You've got to accept the terms and conditions. And if you do, it will update and it will send you a new PS4. So a PDF copy of the document is below, and it looks remarkably similar to the ones you had before. So here is another producer statement I prepared earlier, make that a bit bigger for you. And because it was for Kiwi Rail, it went into an awful lot of detail. So this one I've signed, and I've signed it electronically with my details. They wanted not just the schedule from the PS1, but also what other inspections had been done. So who did the ground? Well, in this case, it was WSP. What drawings were referenced? What drawings did he use? What design standards? Now, all of this was in the PS1 if they could be bothered reading it, but he wanted it pulling into the PS4 as well. And any notes on any changes? So the base plates were changed from M20s to M16 bolts, but that was okay. The bracing was changed from M16 wires to reed bars, and so forth. And we've added all sorts of extra documents just to keep Kiwi Rail happy. So this is putting together the documents for your PS4. So normally with your PS4, you'd add on your site reports. So here's one with the photographs. So those are the 16mm bracing wire that was specified for the walls. Unfortunately, these are the 10mm wires that they actually put in. So those were taken out and replaced with reed bars. As you see, it's basically just a big shed. Very quick and simple to put up. Right. Then we move on and on. I'll just race through that. Here's my next site visit report. And just noting that they've taken out the window, so the girts go straight through. And so updating the differences between the as-drawn and the as-built version of the structure. That's pretty much the finished product. Sorry, those are our reed bars and reed bar connections. And there. As well as that, they wanted to include the site visit from WSP about the ground slab. And there was also, I'm racing through this, sorry, but they also did nuclear density testing for the ground to prove that the ground had been compacted properly. There's a few of those. The concrete mix design for the ground slab. And then we're looking into the materials used. This was imported aluminium sections and so on, and just to explain what was going on. So this was the aluminium cast analysis, and here are the properties of that. And that, I said, is equivalent to the 6082 T6 aluminium that I'd used in the design. And on it goes. So that was construction monitoring. So I'm going to turn off the recording now, and the next seminar in 2 weeks' time will be about residential portal frames from an engineering perspective. And it's looking at how you put a steel frame in a mainly timber framed house that's got jib bracing. That is the equivalent BU count.